about August the 11th or 12th, we moved from Caroline, Tunisia to Castelvetrano, Sicily, which was an air base. And that was kind of strange. The airstrip itself was on more or less of a mesa. And after we got used to the terrain, it was a lot of fun. We'd call in on final approach. And we'd be out of sight. We'd say 9-3 on final approach. Well, he couldn't see us from the tower and go. Had a lot of fun, but there wasn't much other entertainment. The other entertainment we did have was if we would meet any of the ladies in town or something, why we would teach them some kind of naughty words and have them go up to our commanding officer and say, call him a few names. But he grew used to that. He was a good guy. He said, where are they? Where are they? But that was about the entertainment, that and playing poker. On Sunday afternoons, after we had been at Castelvetrano for a while, we used to go to Naples and to Palermo on Sunday afternoons and see the operas. Or do you see an opera or do you hear an opera? I guess you hear an opera.
Both.
You do both. Well, anyway, they were very expensive. I mean, the high-priced seats, they cost a quarter. They were 25 lira, I think the lira was worth a penny at the time. So we could see that. But I have a lot of fond memories. And the people, the poor Sicilians and poor southern Italians, even before the war, the poor people in Italy lived in the south of Italy. All the manufacturing and the large corporations and so on were all in central and northern Italy. And so we would slip food out to them, and we also found out that if they were serving something, if the mess line wasn't very good, the quickest way to change that was to get rid of it. And there were always a bunch of children waiting down at the end of the line, so when they had little pails or buckets, and we would fill them up, because the sooner we got rid of that food, the sooner it was a better chance of getting better food.
As you were in the population of Sicily and southern Italy, were there ever times that you felt danger? What was the attitude?
If I had any feelings about that, I forgot. No, they didn't like the Germans to begin with. Mussolini liked Hitler because he knew that was his salvation. But no, the Italian people did not like the Germans. The Germans came in there and lorded it all over the Italians. They were not friendly allies, at least to the common people.
How did you get word you were about ready to leave Sicily and head to, I believe it was
Well, wait a
England?
minute. Before we leave Sicily, I want to tell you about a surprise we had one time. We were told we were going to have an important visitor, but we didn't know who it was. And pretty soon, there was a squadron of P-38s that was circling our airbase. Nobody knew who was coming. Turns out to be Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, and General Patton and General Mark Clark and Hap Arnold and Omar Bradley. Anybody you ever heard of in the Army Air Corps, and Ike, of course, inspected our troops that day. We were a motley crew by that time, but it didn't make any difference. And our officers' club was picked as the host club after the review. And I just found this out 2 months ago when I saw the obituary of our flight surgeon. I remembered then that he and the other flight surgeons in the group were the bartenders. And we thought, well, what's Doc Miller doing behind the bar? Looks like our commanding officer would be there, or somebody. to serve drinks to a crowd like that. Well, it turns out that they were afraid that there might be some poison around or something. And wouldn't that be the end of it all if somebody poisoned the president or something like that? Anyway, that all came out in his obituary, which I was really surprised to read. But anyway, it was a famous day for our squadron and our group, a very famous day. And boy, we were proud of that. And I got to be one of the greeters at the Oak Club. So I did not shake hands. I was told to not offer my hand. But if anybody wanted to shake hands with me, my job was to say, "You're welcome to the 50th Officers Club." So it was a big day.
Wow. So
So then we
transitioning
moved,
from Sicily to England then.
yeah, and we moved. In fact, we arrived at Saltby Air Base on Valentine's Day, February 14th, 44, and there was about a foot of snow all over the place. After North Africa, it was quite a change.
And did you tell me this was the 316th carrier group at this time, or this was?
No, I joined the 316th before I came home. The entire 316th group was coming home. The 314th, of which I was a member, was not coming home as a group. There were a few of us who moved to the 316th, so we couldn't come home. But I was with the 316th only about a month before we came home in May of 45.
So this was, now you're in England and you're
Yeah.
training for D-Day.
Yes.
How did you go about
And
that?
train. And
Describe that training if you would.
Well, the first thing that must be understood is the weather is terrible. You can plan on it. And it was especially bad because we had to make a night drop. There had never been a daytime drop of paratroops to anybody's knowledge. At least in those theaters over there. Maybe they did it out in the South Pacific. But many is the time, especially in the last month, in say April, we were practicing almost every night. And we'd be flying here 60 or 70 or 80 planes in our group alone. And here comes, they didn't have any communication about the other C-47, other two carrier bases that were in the area. We were all together. And here you're flying along, and the planes would just go through each other like this. I don't know why we were all killed before the invasion. But the practice drops were a whole lot worse, in my opinion, than the invasion drop itself.
Did you drop troops during the training? I mean, you actually did drop the
Yes,
paratroopers?
we dropped some. They were mostly without troops, so it was just getting us used to the terrain. And see, down in North Africa, when we were training for Sicily, we had lots of moon and lots of stars. And we didn't have that in England because you always had a high overcast. It was very dark. As a matter of fact, you flew by the flare, you flew on the other man's wing by the flare of his exhaust on his right board, his right-hand engine. That's what you saw. You didn't see, and they had formation lights they had 3 on each wing that were about that big, one on the fuselage, but you had to get, almost on top of them before you could see the damn things. It was exciting.
When the invasion came and the squadron marshaled for the mission meeting, or you may not have called it a mission meeting, but describe that from the time you woke up to the time you headed out.
Well, in the first place, we were all set to go on June 5th, and then they postponed it. Any thought of sneaking up on the enemy, forget it. But that's about, as a matter of fact, we were all hoping the invasion would go. Let's get go, because this was nerve-wracking flying in the weather at night on these practice drops and so on. We were actually glad to go, and let's get it over with. As a matter of fact, we lost only one pilot on that, and that was kind of a strange deal. He was one of my best friends, Sid Dunnigan. We all wore by this time flak suits, which was nothing more than a vest that was split. It was a half a vest here and a half a vest back here, and a flak helmet, which was the shape of a watermelon, which was good for my big head. But anyway, put that on my head. But anyway, there was an opening here between the vest part of it and the back protected part. And Sid Dunnigan got hit with one bullet in the aircraft. His aircraft was completely, one bullet hit him right between the front and back and killed him. And his co-pilot, Walton Hemmings, flew the airplane back. But that was the only casualty in the squadron we had.
Was this ground fire, do you think?
Oh, it was all ground
from,
fire. It was
so
all ground
ground
fire. See, our altitude, I didn't mention before, but our altitude for most drops was between 5 and 600 feet. That was enough time for the chute to open,
Well,
but
that's
not
low.
enough,
Wow.
because it would have been a lot easier for us to drop from 3,000 feet out of the range of small arms fire, but it was almost a joke when we'd say, well, let's go out, they probably got the slingshots and the BB guns out for us tonight. I mean, it was that easy to shoot us down. I don't know why we didn't lose more planes, because here we are, we had to get down low enough so the chutes would open in time so that the guys wouldn't hit too hard.
But the higher you go, the
But
further
the higher
the
you
drift.
go, the more
and-
chance you're taking that you're going to lose the parachute before you ever hits the ground.
So you dropped your load, circled back around, and headed back for England?
We didn't circle around, we hit the deck. Of course, it was at night, and we went home. We had our maps, of course, with those marker beacons that I pointed out, that had each marker beacon had a name, a code name of a city: Atlanta, Birmingham, Chicago, Phoenix, and what. So if anybody got lost, you say, I'm going down, I'm at Phoenix or something, so we would know where we were. Otherwise, we had to maintain silence, of course.
Did you ever come in smoking? Or did you ever take any rounds into your aircraft?
Well, yes. As a matter of fact, on Normandy, we got probably 25 hits. I guess that was nothing, but because what was to come later, we got over 1,000 hits in the Operation Market Garden.
So take us past D-Day, if you would.
Okay. After D-Day, our job was mainly to fly in, resupply. One of the things we would resupply or fly in was steel matting. These were pieces of steel that were about 10 feet long and maybe 18 inches wide, but actually interlocked. And they made airstrips out because they could just start, and these would smooth out an otherwise bumpy field and so on. So these put those, unfortunately, if they were wet, they were very slippery, so you had to know what you were doing with the aircraft too. But at any rate, our job for maybe the first 2 or 3 months after D-Day was flying in resupplies and evacuating wounded at these advanced airstrips.
And this was into France.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, I think I think Paris fell August 15th. And so we were flying into Orly then. At that time it wasn't called Orly, it was A47. But it's now Orly Airport, south of Paris. That was before they had de Gaulle. At that time they had only 3 airports there. They had A47, Ville-Courbet, and Le Bourget. That's where Lindbergh landed when he went over in 27.
Foster, to backtrack for just a second, you dropped the 82nd Airborne into Sicily, is that correct?
Yes.
did you also drop the 82nd Airborne at D-Day?
Yes.
Other airborne units that you dropped?
We didn't drop any other units that I remember until Operation Market Garden, which was a Holland. At that time, we took in Polish airborne troops who had been training 5 years in England, but were actually exiled Poles that had sneaked out of Poland in 1939. So they'd been in training in England for 5 years. But we flew the 82nd into Sicily, the 82nd into Normandy, and the 82nd into the Rhine crossing. That was March 25th of 45.
So beyond D-Day, you were laying down some resupply for building up airstrips and moving
Yes,
our units.
and
then
rations and arms of all kinds. We even hauled over jeeps. We had special ramps made so you could wheel a jeep up to the inside. We had to remove the seats, of course, that were in the plane, but it would hold one jeep very nicely. So we hauled over many jeeps.
Do you want to move then to Operation Market Garden?
Yeah, that was our first daylight drop, and it was to be in 4 stages. And we flew over the first day. We lost one plane, and that's the first day over there. It was from our base to Orfordness, which is over the east coast of England, over in what they called the Wash, the North Sea Wash it was called. And then from there down to Ostend, Belgium, and then to Eindhoven, Maryland, and Eindhoven, Holland, and then into Arnhem, Holland. And the first 2 days outside of losing one plane were more or less uneventful. So the third day, the weather was getting bad, and it was postponed today, and we finally said we'd have to go the next day. And all of us were in the planes. We had all the Polish airborne troops aboard, and I remember those Polish airborne troops. I remember them filing their bayonets. These guys had been training for 5 years. They were ready to do something. So anyway, they boarded, and we waited, and our number came up, and we all agreed it was an order. We're going to move 8,000 feet over the field. The bad weather, or the marginal weather, was supposed to be all clear at 8,000, so we flew up to 8,000 feet, and we didn't see anybody else. So our radio operator called in, and said, we're flying we were circling at 8,000 feet over the field. Where is everybody? There was no answer. The weather had turned so bad that we didn't know really where everybody was. We thought maybe, they were down 1,000 feet. Maybe we misunderstood, or maybe they'd found the weather when they came up at 8,000 feet no good, so we went down to 7 and then 6. And we're calling in all this time. The radio operator was. Well, what we didn't know was our receiver was out in the plane. We were calling in. The tower heard us and said the mission has been called off, return to base. But we never heard that. And there was a standing rule that you never brought the troops back to base. Never. In other words, boy, they were strict among themselves. And these Poles, they wanted to get into combat. So here we are, just absolutely no choice. There was nobody up. We didn't know what was going on. We couldn't find anybody. We couldn't contact anybody, but we didn't know why we weren't getting any answers. Because with the radio equipment we had at the time, I guess there was no way the radio operator could tell that he had defective receiving equipment. So we started out, we thought, well, maybe, because there were gonna be, 9 groups, I think, I forgot, a bunch of planes, but the whole mission had been scrubbed for another day. So there we go. So we went to Orphaness, we flew over Dead Reckoning, they call it. And we hit Orphaness, and then we estimated our time over to Ostend, Belgium, still not seeing another plane of any kind in the sky, any kind. So that was about 200 miles, maybe 250 from Orphaness to Ostend. Unfortunately, Ostend was right near Dunkirk, and Dunkirk had been bypassed by the British Army and was still in German hands. Now we're flying, as the saying goes, flying blind by Dead Reckoning. If we had been off 25 miles in an hour and a half flight, and that would not be unusual, and not knowing the winds or over water all the time. So we approached, by this time we had dropped down to about 1,000 feet. And here we're approaching what we hope is Ostend, Belgium, but we're not sure if it's not Dunkirk. So we decided to go up the coastline a bit, because if we knew if it was Dunkirk and we came in there, we knew we'd get shot down, because it was heavily fortified, but it was a very small contained area. So I said, well, let's go on up the coast, let's don't go near this, it might be Dunkirk, we'll go up here, up 25 miles and see if we can find Ostend up there. But we flew up the coastline, no shots fired, no nothing. And we realized the area down there was flooded. And I said, gee, that was Ostend after all, back there. But we were pretty much over Holland at the time. No shots were fired until we turned. I guess they wanted to see how far we'd go or something, and then it all broke loose. We got out of there, and we wanted to get back to Ostend and go on over to Eindhoven and up to Arnhem. Unfortunately, they got our hydraulic system, which means the props, well, there was one prop that was idling, just like this, which was no good. In fact, it was a handicap to us, and the other one was revving out of control. We had 19 paratroops aboard, plus a crew of 4. So it's not going to fly very far.
Foster, how many planes were in this formation?
How many would have been in the formation if
Were you alone?
I was absolutely alone? Absolutely. So we flew back to Ostend, and I called the jump master. We had Bud Hurtig, our co-pilot, and I called later a board of directors meeting in a hurry there. I said, here's the deal. We aren't going to be able to make it to Eindhoven and Arnhem because we were losing altitude. I said, we can get you back in there, but here's where you land on Walcheren Island. He says, his name, by the way, started with Hare. It was something like Harzanowski or Harzalewski or something. But anyway, when he saw the wild hare, that was a good omen. Oh, he could go. Well, anyway, he says, no, we go back. We go back. Okay, so we went back up. But this time the Germans didn't wait for us to. They started opening up on us, and I've never seen any movies like that before. But anyway, we dropped out the troops, and they had to stand up and hook up and bang. Boy, they were gone. And then we had a choice of ditching in the North Sea, or English Channel it was by that time, or going back to England. But I didn't think we could make it because we had one engine out, and the other engine was gaining RPMs every minute. So I I headed straight west. I thought I'll go to the Chalk Cliffs because that's a beach area right there by the Chalk Cliffs. And if we ditch in the channel, it'll be all water is not a good place to ditch. There are many areas on the southern coast of England where it's a very steep drop off. There's no beach area there at all. So you drop in the water in the ground before you get out. But anyway, we were heading back and we finally see what amounts to the Chalk Cliffs, and we were still flyable. Everything was at full bore, and we had by this time thrown out everything that would move. So throw out everything that moves. So they were throwing out everything, parachutes, everything. Because there was no use to use the parachutes. We couldn't gain the altitude, so we couldn't use it. So we came back and started to fly around the coast. And we flew around hoping we might see an air base right near the coast so we could land, and sure enough, here comes an air base in the view. So we hand cranked the gear down because there was no hydraulic system. And there was only one try, there was no pulling up and going around. We made it the first time that we didn't. So I overshot a little. And of course, when we landed, we had no brakes. And I went through a barbed wire fence down at the other end. And there were barrage buoys all over this RAF base. And I could see, you know that old expression, you could see the whites of their eyes? I saw the whites of the eyes of the British when they were coming. And I finally ground looped the plane. I rolled back the window, you know, because I couldn't figure out from the maps where we were, because, so I hollered down to these guys. The airplane looked awful. It was just all shot up. And I said, "Where are we?" He said, "You're at I bloke, you're at Gravesend." I said, "What? Gravesend?" He said, "We're at Gravesend." You telling me?
And your window, you said, "Where are we?" And they said, "You're at Gravesend." Bloke. How'd you get back? Or was that that aircraft was awash then?
Well, the squadron was not able to come and pick us up because it was still one more day of the Holland Airborne operation Market Garden, so they didn't pick us up for 3 days. So we had a big time. At the time that we dropped off everything and we threw out everything in the plane, we didn't know that a motorcycle that belonged to the poles was still hooked by the handlebars to the drop racks on the bottom. This thing was hanging at a 45-degree angle. Well, it was a godsend because it was up high enough off the ground, so when I landed with the gear down, I didn't hit the bicycle, or I didn't hit the motorbike. Also, Bud Hurtig and I drove the co-pilot, and I drove that all over southern England. I had a lot of fun, you know. We'd get the girls and go for a ride. And then I found out that the squadron, the operations officer was coming down to Gravesend to pick us up, that Operation Market Garden was over. So I went to the commanding officer, who's a veteran of the Battle of Britain, a very nice guy. I think his name was Russell. And I wanted to thank him very profusely for being so kind and hospitable to us, you know. I was laughing, we're just a bunch of dumb yanks, you know. And so he laughed. I said, "Is there anything I can do, anything I can bring you back or anything?" He said, "Well, I do love your American peanut butter." I said, "I'll make it a point that you get." So I got a gallon of peanut butter and I got that back to him. That was the end of Operation Market Garden.
That aircraft was then totaled?
No, strangely enough, it was not. Oh, I forgot one thing about that. To probably, hopefully minimize my fears and so on when we're getting hit so hard over Holland over there, I yelled over to Bud Hurtig, the co-pilot. I said, "Bud, they're throwing everything at us but the kitchen sink." He says, "Take a look at the right wing, they just threw the sink at us." A hole about this big out there. But that was only one, there were a whole bunch of holes this big. And a whole bunch this big, from small arms fire.
The wild hair was repaired and back in the air?
Yes, much to my surprise, I thought it would be scrapped.
Did you fly her again?
No, I didn't, I got a new plane after that. A friend of mine got my plane, and eventually, that same plane had, on April sixth of 1945, was one of the 5 planes we lost by flying into high tension lines